also saw that you might have grown up about an hour and 45 minutes, about 2 hours away from the temple from Kona Hongwanji
Mhm.
yourself. And you're a fourth generation Japanese American living
Mhm.
on the Big Island. Uh, it's amazing to hear that you grew up swimming in the rivers and having like a really deep
Mhm.
connection with Hawaii. What was growing up like in Hawaii?
Oh, it was special growing up here. And I feel really privileged and honored to be able to, come back home to the Big Island, and to be able to serve this community. While it's not, my hometown of Hilo, on the other side of the island, but being an island person, like growing up on an island, it's very different than growing up on maybe on the continent or other places. There's a closer knit sense of community here on the island. In Hawaii, we talk about the aloha spirit, right? That sense of warmth and connection and the sense of caring, right? That we have towards others and each other and the land, the Aina, right? So
And
yeah.
and have you kind of continued that connection to the land? I mean, I know I've seen some pictures on your Instagram that you do some cave exploring, you do some nature hikes and things like that. Is that something that you like to do on a regular basis?
I enjoy hiking. I enjoy the outdoors, but with the time commitments and work and just life, it's hard to kind of keep up with those types of things sometimes, right? So, um, yeah, serving a temple community, really does take a lot of time, and energy and just kind of sometimes becomes all encompassing, right? So,
Yeah, yeah, and because you're on call, right? You're on call all the time, like for
yes,
for any kind of special need or
yeah.
circumstance. So, and what's that like? I mean, have you gotten to know different pockets of the island that you otherwise would, growing up, you never really kind of ventured into, but being a minister, having to maybe go and do some FaceTime with some uh, people of the assembly, some people that practice with you in your temple. Do you have to kind of go and into the little pockets of the Big Island that you hadn't been to before?
Sure, yeah. When I got assigned here at the Kona Hongwanji Temple, it was my first time living in Kona, right? And so, learning a whole new community and while not so dissimilar, right, than living, in Hilo, but every community is unique, and every community has its own, rhythms and cycles and history, right? And to be able to kind of immerse myself in this history, right, and to learn about this place, right, and kind of this community, it has been such a rich experience for me, to be able to do that. Yeah, being able to kind of see the ins and outs of a community and the people and the family stories of the people I serve and care for. That's been so enriching to my life and to my ministry actually. So yeah.
Yeah, and like just like flavor wise, like in relative to Hilo, because I'm not entirely sure about the makeup of where Kona Hongwaji is versus where you grew up. But I mean, is there more of a or where you are now? Is it a little bit more rural, agricultural kind of setup, like kind of where you are on the coast, or like versus like more of like a small town or kind of more of a city in Hilo, or I'm just not sure what either one really is like. But what would
Sure.
you say a defining character of where you are now versus Hilo is?
Yeah, Hilo's more of a like a small town, right?
Mm.
A little bit more compact. Kona is a little bit more kind of spread out along the coast and smaller pockets of communities and smaller towns, and so a lot more rural here than where I grew up in Hilo. A lot of my members, have a history of and still raise coffee, Kona coffee, right?
Oh.
That's a lot of the immigrant ancestors, right? Came to this community and came to this region and farmed coffee. And so a lot of the family farms still exist. A lot of my members still, pick coffee and raise coffee. So, it's quite, more rural, more kind of agrarian, community. But yeah, it's such a rich community. So
Yeah, and you have a pretty profound connection to just, I mean, historically, in a historical sense, with agricultural communities, because you're a fourth generation Japanese American, and your great grandparents, I believe, established or worked within sugar plantations. Is that right?
Mhm.
Like and they had migrated to do that work. And do you feel like a connection to agricultural communities? And do you feel like there is something that the Jodo Shinshu message and the way that you do community outreach or community building or development, like there's something about connecting with people that work in that capacity brings out of you, or that you feel like is important about the message that Jodo Shinshu can share with them?
Yeah, well, while I'm removed kind of, from, the agricultural past and the history of my own family. My grandparents raised sugarcane, on my paternal grandparents, on the east side and Hilo side. And, and I remember growing up with, my grandparents having the tractor and the farm, and the fields, and so, but I'm kind of removed from that. Like, maybe my dad, helped work on the farm and stuff. But then, um, like in most immigrant families, right? The succeeding generations kind of move away from that type of work, right? But I appreciate, and really, have a deeper understanding or deeper appreciation for that history, that past, that hard work, right? That immigrants, brought to, um, you know, Hawaii, brought to America, um, you know, um, and striving for that better life for their children and grandchildren and succeeding generations. Um, and 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 so living here, in Kona, and kind of having a lot of my members, my sangha members, who are still really tied to the land, really, really grounded here, right, in this place, is really, um it gives me a different perspective, right, um on how we cultivate and nurture community, right? In a more rural area, right? That there is, a greater sense of having to work together to be the temple being a resource, the temple being a community center, a place that people can come to, right? Because that's historically what our temples have been, right? That they were places of refuge, right? From the harsh realities of immigrant life, from the harsh realities of 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 the plantations, the fields, the what you call it, the discrimination, right, faced by many immigrants, right, over time. That these temples were places, that people could be, and celebrate, their heritage and their community and their families and their lives, right? Um, and and I think, for Jodo Shinshu, has always been grounded in community, in family, in that ordinary life of those of us who are living, right? And these, uh, immigrant stories are grounded and, in the Jodo Shinshu, uh, you know, tradition, right? That Jodo Shinshu and Buddhism came to Hawaii, came to America, right, through the immigrant population, right, and sustained them, right, through those harsh times and through those early years, and they built temples, they built these places of refuge, right, for themselves and for their communities. And so for me, it's in my work, it's always being reminded of how we are grounded in community, right? And how do we nurture, and enliven community, in very real practical ways. And that temple and sangha is a place from birth to our birth in the Pure Land, right? That we serve and we care for everybody in this community from, in all stages of life. And we celebrate together, we cry together, we pull together, right, when times are challenging and times are tough, right? That is the nature of our community. And that's, to me, right, the nature of sangha, right? And then the pure sense of what sangha should be, right? A place of practice. And very much in Jodo Shinshu, sangha is a place of practice, because living as sangha, living together, is our practice of Nembutsu. So,
Mm. Yeah, and I mean, certainly the community element when it comes to being present for every stage of the human life. I know that Kona Hongwanji offers preschool care, and it has that within the infrastructure of the workings of the temple. And I'm assuming that the rest of there's various judo, and I believe there's a taiko. There's
mhm,
like a lot of enrichment, a lot of activity,
mhm,
maybe more physical activity and otherwise, and community building activity that's available there for everyone of all ages. I mean, really from
mhm,
preschool on. I mean, that's
mhm.
pretty early, and that's pretty
Yeah.
incredible that you do that. And then yeah, I mean, like as far as like the storied nature of it, I was looking it up, and Kona Hongwanji is about 128 years old. Is that right? I mean, something close to that.
Yep.
And there's this stone archway that was built in 1915 for $400 or something like that back then,
Mhm,
and it's still standing, and it's right there, and it lasts, and
mhm.
the impact is enormous just to even probably see that, and to be a part of like a very historic community and a sangha that's been living and practicing together for so long. It must be kind of a profound experience to be connected to something so rich in history.
It really is, and it's really kind of I feel uh, the responsibility of that, right? To be the leader of this community, to be able to care for this community, is quite a privilege, and to be able to honor that legacy, right? And to understand that legacy, right? And to pass that on to the future generations. However, it's also looking to our present and looking to the future, right? That every community grows and changes over time, right? And then we have to honor that. And Buddhism, right? The foundations of Buddhism is this idea of impermanence, of change, that like we're always constantly transforming and evolving, and so we have to kind of embrace that, right? And to see what the opportunities are for the present and for the future,
Mm,
right? So building on the past, right? Always kind of reassessing what have we done, how have we done things, and how can we do things differently or do things uh, maybe better sometimes, or just in a way that is appropriate for the times that we're living in now, right? And I think that's the pragmatic aspect of these teachings, right? Of Buddhism, which helps us to see the opportunities in each moment, right? That we're never fixed and never trapped by our current situation, right? And so right along with uh the preschool, right? When we had to lock down right during the pandemic, and that was such a transformative time for many communities, right? Across the world, and you know we partnered with the Boys and Girls Club, to bring in like a after school program. So they come in the afternoons, and so we serve the community, the communities in our area, and the school age children, that they come to our social hall that's being used by Boys and Girls Club, throughout the week, as a safe place to be after school, right? And that's another way that, how are we serving the needs of our community, right? Because it's beyond just the spiritual, right? It's also creating a welcoming place that the community feels uh, good about coming to, feels welcome to, right? Um, I think that's very important. So.
yeah, and like there's that practical everyday element that is enormous, and being able to offer things to something like the Boys and Girls Club. I mean, like it allows for yeah, like people to maybe connect and maybe ask questions about, oh, like what is this building associated with, what is this organization, what is Jodo
Mhm.
Shinshu, but also too it's just kind of like this is where kids need to go play somewhere and be safe and
Yep.
feel safe, and so
Yep.
and here's a spot for that. So it's really
Mhm.
wonderful that you open your doors to that and really feel interwoven and continue the interweaving, as we go into the present and the future. Uh, that interweaving of Kona Hongwanji within the surrounding area, and making sure that it's
Mhm.
it's being used and serving others. And and also too, like just with your own background with Buddhism, because I believe that your grandmother, I'm not sure on which side, but one of your grandmothers was very uh devout, or like had a spiritual quality to her that maybe kind of rubbed off on you a little bit. And then I also know that another family member of yours was in a Shingon track, or like had a connection to Shingon.
Mhm.
And I was just curious, like how did Jodo Shinshu kind of coalesce in your in yourself, and what
Yeah,
drew you to that versus maybe some other express manifestations of Buddhism?
sure. Yeah. So my background actually is my mom's family is Shingon. And my grandmother, my maternal grandmother was very devout Shingon practitioner. And so, initially I had a real sense of, watching her and seeing her live her life, and that deep faith that she had, right, in the teachings, was very profound. But then on my dad's side of the family, they were Jodoshu. So, and I was very close to those grandparents. That's my paternal grandparents, and especially my paternal grandmother. Very they helped to, they used to pick me up from elementary school, and I would spend a lot of time with them, and and we lived close by, right? So they were such big influences in my life. And so but I didn't grow up Jodo Shinshu, but I knew of Jodo Shinshu. I mean, it's a small community, right? And so a lot of my friends from school, were members of the Hilo Honganji, and I went to one of the youth camps that the Hawaii Honganji, the sponsors annually. Yeah, and but I didn't really delve into the traditions so much until when I got to college, really. And when being away from Hawaii for the first time, on the mainland, and um uh being both a racial and religious minority, right, for the first time, really, and kind of taking that all in and being asked also, what does so you're a Buddhist, what does that mean? What do you believe? And I didn't really quite have a articulate answer, right? Because growing up Buddhist, it's kind of you're more cultural Buddhist than really kind of understanding and really living the teachings in a very uh, kind of actualized way, right? And so after being asked those questions, I began reading a lot more, and a lot of the books that I found that were in English were about Jodo Shinshu. Al Bloom, Dr. Al Bloom, and Dr. Taitetsu Uno, and those writers, um, were quite profound. And what I found really that captured my heart and mind was this idea of boundless wisdom and compassion, right? That there is a dynamic force in the world of pure compassion that does not discriminate, that embraces all in a very real way. And that to me was very liberating, and piqued my interest, and sparked my imagination, and spoke to me in a way that, oh, because so often we hear of religions and of different uh, paths that are very exclusive or very exclusionary. And what I found as I learned more about Jodo Shinshu was this amazing sense of being embraced, never to be abandoned. Um, and how does knowing that, right, as a person growing up, as a person going through life, how does that change the way we respond to life's challenges, right? Knowing that we are never alone, right? That boundless wisdom, boundless compassion uh, is always supporting and sustaining our lives, and nurturing who we are. Um, and so, yeah, that was kind of the spark of my interest in Jodo Shinshu. But then I didn't have a community of practice, right? And I didn't belong to a temple, right? A Jodo Shinshu temple at the time. And so when I graduated from undergraduate, I moved home to Hawaii, but I moved to Honolulu on Oahu, and uh, I was living basically a few blocks away from the Mo'ili Hongwanji temple, and which is a Jodo Shinshu temple, and I just walked over one Sunday. I went to a Sunday service and um, was there ever since. Like in my early 20s, as a young college graduate, and I found a community, right, that embraced me, that nurtured me, right, and eventually, I began getting involved with one of the my fondest memories of the Mo'ili Hongwanji was that I walked in, got greeted and welcomed, and basically the first thing someone asked me was, do you want to volunteer for this project Dana that we have, that it's an interfaith elderly caregivers group that was founded at Mo'ili Hongwanji, and they do like friendly visits. They take seniors shopping, take them to doctor's appointments, and so it's a really volunteer based caregiving, right? And so I was kind of like, oh, okay, sure, that's awesome. Like, like to kind of encounter a community that was putting their teachings into practice, right? And Dana, as we know, right, is the Buddhist concept and the teaching of selfless giving. And to be able to kind of give of myself in that way, and to see people modeling that type of values and those behaviors, right, was quite remarkable. And I was like, wow, this is pretty special, right? And so I continued being a member at that temple for many years. I served on the board, and I became temple president at one point. And really, all those experiences have nurtured my spiritual development, my growth, right, and deepening my understanding of the Dharma and how it works, right, and sparked within me, right, this which led me to this path, right, the unfolding of the Dharma in my life, kind of, these causes and conditions kind of came together and have put me and have helped me to be who I am today. So,
Man, that's a it's a really wonderful story, and I'm just so glad that you had this experience where, I mean, yeah, you probably got a lot of questions. You were a religious and a you were a minority because of being a Japanese American going to the continent, and I believe it was in Oregon, right, where you did your undergraduate, and there you are being asked tons of questions, and I'm sure that probably got exhausting, or that you have
mm,
to kind of explain yourself all the time, and yet that sense of inquiry led you to to inquire and to look into, well, what when I say I'm a Buddhist, like, what does that mean? And then you that kind of opened up such
mhm,
a powerful momentum for you to
mhm,
not just recognize this uh, unbelievable compassion that's just flowing and just moving the universe and moving yourself, and then having outlets. Unfortunately, where you were an undergraduate, you didn't have access to that in the same way, but then you move to a place where you can show up by walking across the street, more or less, and then you find
mhm,
yourself developing a committed practice. I think that's just such a wonderful story. Um, and I want to get more into to some of those details, especially about that element of service that's there. But I'm want to know a little bit more about that feeling that you had in college when you started to investigate that compassion that belies or inherently operates within all things and kind of
mhm,
sustains everything. And because like there are so many hardships and struggles and difficulties that happen on a global level, all the way down to hyper local, like to yourself, your body, your relationships, or whatever it is. And I could see that someone might be having a hard time squaring that as having compassion within it, or having
mhm,
compassion being imbued with those difficulties, with those
mhm,
hardships. uh and yet you found that through inquiry that indeed you're connecting with and recognizing and offering gratitude towards this compassion, from the Pure Land, from Amida Buddha. So I
mhm,
just want to know, like, what do you say to yourself when you start kind of seeing some hardships happen? And what do you say to others that are kind of experiencing, well, I'm just not feeling the compassion. I'm not feeling that
mhm,
compassion come my way.
mhm. Yeah, that's kind of the the eternal question, right? How do we negotiate, right, the our lives, right, and manage our lives, but grounded in these teachings, right, in a very realistic way, right? I think that's what the Dharma and Shakyamuni's teachings point us to, right, is those truths of life: birth, old age, sickness, and death, right? And he sought the way of liberation from those things, right? But it wasn't freedom from suffering from these things, right? It was a spiritual awakening of transforming our perspective and how we relate to these things, right? That is what's liberative of these teachings, right? It's that shift in perspective, right? That is the glass half empty? Is the glass half full? It's still just a glass. And it's as full or as empty as we make it to be, right? And so that is our agency. And that's what the teachings empower us to be able to see our own agency, right? In perceiving life in a way that is, realistic and optimistic. I think was it Roshi Joan Halifax, I think, talks about wise hope, I think, and I think that's very important, I think, in the way that the Buddhist way of life looks at the challenges we face, right? We know that we will encounter these things, right? That every day we are getting a little bit older, getting a little bit more gray, feeling a little more aches and pains, uh, you know, encounter the unexpected, right? A diagnosis of a major illness, something blows us sideways. But, right, can we, through the teachings, right, be able to kind of weather those ups and downs of life, right, with a sense of equanimity, and a sense of balance, right? So we just had the equinox last week, right? The spring equinox, and in Japanese Buddhism, right, it's a time of ohigan, right? Which means the other shore, and it's a time to reflect on, right, this world of suffering, of samsara, and the other shore of awakening, right? The Pure Land, and the world of enlightenment, and how, through our lives we are traversing on the ocean, right? And sailing on this, the grand ocean of life, right? From our birth to our birth in the Pure Land. But, you know, we we have rivers and streams and lakes to cross on a daily basis, right? These things that happen, right? And right, when we rely on the Dharma is our ship, right? The vow of Amida is our ship, which helps us to sail across these, rough waters. Um, and I think it's one interesting, right, in the teachings, right, having a profound sense of confidence, right, in the teachings, right, that they work, that if we um, allow ourselves to be kind of embraced by these teachings, embraced by the compassion, right, of the Buddha, we can see our lives differently, right? We can feel that, well, I am still suffering through an illness, but I am not my illness, right? That there is this way of seeing life that is realistic, but also hopeful, um, and and very grounded in uh, in the realities of what is present, right? Because we can never escape what is present. And that's what the Buddha teaches ultimately. And in my work, in my training too, I did training in clinical pastoral education. And served as a chaplain at a major hospital here in Hawaii, as part of my training. And to be able to, you know, um, what I learned was that oftentimes there are no answers, often, right, to life's biggest challenges and biggest problems, right? But that doesn't mean that there isn't room for hope, and that we don't stand alone, right? And so my role as a spiritual care provider, as a priest, as a chaplain, was to stand with people, right, with patients and families, to face the unknown together, right, to know that they are not alone, right? And to help bring uh, a sense of that they are surrounded and they are supported by great compassion, right? Even in the darkest times. I think that's the same as my work here, in serving community, is that we I do a lot of work in end of life care, just the course of living, right? I companion families and individuals who are facing, right, the end of life, and that's inescapable. But it doesn't have to be um, something we do by ourselves, right? And I think that is what these teachings offer. It is an understanding that we are always surrounded by numerous causes and conditions that enable my life to live, that enable me to be who I am, right? No person is an island, ultimately, that we are always interconnected. And so that in those connections, in that community, is the living Nembutsu, is the living Dharma, is the manifestation of wisdom and compassion, always intersecting in our lives. So that's how I kind of view that aspect. And how do we, nurture, and how do we offer real hope and real companionship and spiritual friendship, um, you know, for people through the teachings.
Wow, that was a really beautiful, really beautiful answer. Thank you for offering so much of that. I mean, because it's a hard, yeah, it's that eternal question. But I mean, just you offering that phrasing of it being, well, life is suffering. That is a truth. That is a truth of this world, of this existence. And what is important is that what what Buddhism can offer is a change in perspective, where maybe there's something in between recognizing the dire circumstances and just the warm and fuzzy bits, but like something where you are um, really experiencing life and allowing a degree of openness that once you open up to and let go of certain identifiers, then
Mhm,
this compassion can kind of really circulate and really kind
mhm,
of be present, or you can have maybe a greater awareness of the compassion that is
mhm,
circulating in the world. uh, and it Gosh, it must be such a profound experience going through chaplaincy training and
mhm,
also working in a hospital, working with end of life care. That I'm sure that elements of that still pop up in your ministerial role right now, and just like being there for members that are experiencing that.
mhm,
And when you deal with that, I mean, do you find that there's like the dealing with mortality, like your own community members, things around you? Does it fundamentally shift something inside you, or does it kind of build
mhm.
upon some of the other shifting that has already happened when you were experiencing this greater awareness of the compassion that you had when in your undergraduate experience?
Mm. Yeah, I think there's a sense of urgency, right? When we come to realize the impermanence of life, right, and the preciousness of each moment, that, right, the encounters that we have in life are unique, right? The Japanese uh, uh what you call it, the saying, Ichi-go, ichi-e, right? One moment, one encounter, right? That there is this kind of ephemeral moment of meeting and coming apart, right? That these moments don't come very often, and may never happen again, right? And I think Buddhism helps us to see um, that preciousness of of each encounter, and that there is an opportunity to learn, to grow, to share, to become more fully human, right, through our experiences. And Buddhism, there are no shortcuts, right, to that understanding. But the teachings are a guide for us to be able to navigate those challenges with a sense of grace, a sense of compassion for ourselves and others, um, and a sense of urgency for not wasting time, not wasting this moment, because we don't know when our last breath will happen, ultimately. But we do know that we are here living now. And so how do we make the most of this moment? But when people especially are facing end of life, I just recently um, a temple member who transitioned and was born in the Pure Land, but she had such a real deep and profound confidence and faith in these teachings and in um, the in Amita's compassion. And so I would visit her in the hospital, and I would visit her at home while she was in hospice, and you know, um, uh, you know, a week before she passed, I went to visit with her and sat with her for a while. And while she couldn't really communicate so much at that point, we were talking, and then I asked her, would you like to, let's say the Nembutsu together, and she immediately put her hands together, in Gasho, and you know, and I said the Nembutsu, together with her, right? Just that, you know, that's the proof that these teachings um, have a great impact and profoundly transform people's lives, right? That this woman could face her mortality with a sense of peace, a sense of, that I'm okay, that everything goes back to, in our tradition, Namo Amida Butsu, the Nembutsu, right? That is our beginning, our end, and that which continues, you know, um, and so that was quite a remarkable lesson for me, right? That and for me, that's the gift of being in community and of serving community, is that I learn so much from my members every day about these teachings and how they work in people's lives, like in real people's lives. Not something academic, not something in a book, but on the ground where the rubber meets the road. And when we're facing those critical life challenges and those transitions, that these teachings do work, right? That these teachings offer comfort, offer courage, offer a way of being in the world that is just present and human and real.
Amazing. And it is it's such a beautiful story that you shared with the person that was transitioning. They were in hospice, and they were starting to, lose some of their faculties, and yet all of that practice, or however you want to phrase it, that engagement with the Nembutsu and Gasho, and
Mhm,
for them to uh, c- become aware enough or present enough to participate in that with you.
mhm,
And that and something else that's really beautiful about this that I'm maybe piecing together, hopefully correctly, is that, from what I understand, the Nembutsu is an act of gratitude. It's an
mhm,
expression of gratitude,
mhm,
and that's more or less what belies Jodo
mhm,
Shinshu, is just like is this understanding that there's this gratitude and a awareness of these unbelievably sustaining vows that were made, and
mhm,
that are present and inherent with all things. And so the gasho is a physical way of expressing that gratitude, and the mutsu is another way of expressing that gratitude. And then from doing that, there is this hope and courage to
mhm,
face. So out of gratitude can come
mhm,
hope and courage.
mhm,
And I think that's something that I
mhm,
don't know if I hear often, or if I did, I might be mistaken or forgotten. But there's something really amazing about that, because sometimes just gratitude, it feels like it just ends there. It's just
mhm.
like, all right, gratitude. And I'm just happy. I'm good with it. you know, but
Yeah.
then, you could say, well, I'm grateful. And then that makes me able to
Mhm,
help others, be like this like courage to really be with dying, or be with transitioning,
mhm,
or be with my suffering. Like that is really courageous, and that is
mhm.
really, there's hope in that too. And it's just like, so thank you for phrasing that and for putting it in that way.
Yeah, gratitude, right, is not something passive. People often think of gratitude as just passive and something you know, uh, but gratitude can be very dynamic, like you mentioned. It can be very generative and very powerful, which allows us to encounter life's challenges with a sense of courage and grace, and a sense of compassion, right, for ourselves and others. And I think at the end of the day, right, I think we're all struggling to get by every day, especially now in these kind of challenging, particularly challenging times, that uh, that to be grateful for all that we have um, is a powerful act of resistance. You know, to be able to see gratitude in our most difficult moments is an act of resistance and an act of courage. Absolutely. So.
And they almost necessitate each other. Not that I'm an expert on this, but that when great suffering happens, that it is met with great compassion.
Mhm.
Like there is this
Mhm.
uh, response, like I don't know,
Mhm.
from within, from without, from
Mhm.
organizations, from individuals. Like there is this you know like that Fred Rogers quote that I think has
Mhm.
been passed around the internet a lot. It's like, his mother used to say whenever there's a disaster or something like that, look for the helpers, like look at the people that are helping right now. And so when wildfires break out or when various other things happen, there are people there trying to put the fire out, or help people evacuate or whatever it is. And so there is that when there is suffering, there is something that is meeting that. And it's amazing to see that gratitude can be that dynamic force that can express itself through courage, through safety efforts and everything like that. And on that note, yeah, because we are in particularly uh, difficult times, globally, nationally, everything,
Mhm.
and environmentally. And I know that you strike me as someone, and I think I've seen through your biography that you are someone that cares very deeply, and it's really inspiring. And you do work with the ACLU, you do work with your as a minister to your sangha, and you travel the country doing conferences, and but you also you dedicate some time and energy to social concerns and efforts
Mhm.
uh, as a minister, and you also an expression of that I think is really interesting is that you take time in Dharma talks to address things. And I know that um, there's this idea of uh, the way that Dharma can be communicated, or that truth can be communicated, is with a lion's roar, and there's a ferocity to that, and a loud decibel level, or
Mhm.
like a high
Mhm.
decibel level. Uh, how are you finding, like, are you finding other voices that you are feeling inspired by right now, like Bishop Buddy and
Mhm.
people like that, that you're finding are kind of projecting that lion's roar out and
Mhm.
helping people? And where do you dig deep to not be discouraged right now,
Mhm.
and to make sure that the way that you project yourself
Mhm.
is coming from a balanced and helpful place?
Mhm. Yeah, good question. I think, some days are a struggle. They really are. Every day is different. And we show up each day uh, with different energy levels, different places in our lives. It's just, but what always grounds me, right, is this reaffirmation of my practice, of my vows, of living the vows of the Bodhisattva, right? As a Mahayana school, that, we are in a Mahayana tradition, we are live the Bodhisattva ideal, right? And that is the core of our teachings, right? That liberation is not just for oneself, but is for others always. That is a mutuality in our liberation. That's never just me, myself alone. And so, I take courage and comfort and wisdom in these teachings and the practice that grounds me, and recenters my life. Every morning I go before my home butsudan, and I offer incense, and I sit and I chant a sutra, say the nembutsu, and at least and I just sit quietly for a few minutes, and just to be present, to kind of recenter myself, to refocus, and to offer gratitude that I have another day to another opportunity, right? To be able to be of service, to be able to um, share light with others, to share these teachings with others, and to offer a sense of hope in these dark times. You know, um, And so I have to kind of, always uh, remember my practice, because that is the fount of of where this inspiration comes from, right? Is that when we go back to these teachings, when we go back to our practice, that is centering, that is grounding, that is where we can replenish our ability to be able to be of service. And that's so important, especially in these critical times. I take wisdom also from uh, I think was it Mushim Ikeda had talked about I vow not to burn out. I think one of our articles, right? And I think that's a very apt you know description of our times that we're living in. Like yeah, that there's so many things, but we still need to rest. We still need to be present. We still need to attend to ourselves in order to be able to care for others. And we also have to be able to clearly see what is our wheelhouse, right? What is our purview? Where is our, and what is our capacity to be of service, right? With the hundreds of things, or thousands of things that are going on, we can't respond to everything, but we can respond in the way that is appropriate and is uh, authentic to the way that we can offer service, right? And so it's always reminding myself that I can't do all of this. I can't, speak out on everything, but I can offer some perspective and some wisdom from our tradition, in a way that is relevant to what is happening in today's world, or to a particular situation, or to a challenge, right, that is happening, right? And to offer some dharmic wisdom, you know, uh, for engaging in that work. And so I see my role as helping to offer some perspective, right? But also offering hope, but also helping people to see their own agency, right? And that they are empowered to make change, to stand up, to speak out, to be able to, you know, bring their own light into our darkened world. That to me is what I hope to achieve. And some days I'm inspired to write, and inspired to kind of, other days I'm kind of like, oh, it's a struggle. Like, like, I mean, I think a lot of writers, and a lot of people face that, right? Like, it's just, some days it's just like, oh, but then, some mornings I wake up and it's like, okay, now I know what to say, or now I know what's feeling, what's on my heart, right? And how has the Dharma worked on my heart, and worked on my understanding of the situation that we're facing, and how do I hope to offer some wisdom for that? So.
Yeah, and I think what's really important too, I mean, it's considering how much you do, and you do a great deal. It's there's a comfort, I guess, in knowing that you are human too, and that you have your days when the burden feels too great, and you need to take time, and you need to vow to not burn out, and you have to like take care. And I think that's really, really important. And I think also there's something about that feeling in its own right, where it might feel like an empty day or a gap day. Oh, well, I couldn't get up and write that article or that piece or that Dharma talk the way that I wanted to word it. I took a break. I did some self-care that day. It doesn't really count as my activism day. But it's like, no, well, that was you can now connect with a lot of people that feel powerless right now. That's how people feel. And they don't always have that connection to that vessel that's taking them across this critical time of suffering. And so you have this ability to connect with somebody who feels like that maybe more regularly, or just that's just a general part of the human condition, and that could be part of the time that the Dharma is working on it within your heart. And so it's really important to take that time and to
Mhm.
resettle. Um, and when it comes to like your collaboration, because I know that you also do some interfaith work as well,
Mhm.
and it seems like with Bishop Buddy, you take some inspiration from some of these people.
Mhm.
What has your experience been like? Whether or not it's addressing these critical times that we're in, but also just like interfaith work in Hawaii, and just in general, like, have you felt like you've been inspired by some people that you've heard, or some perspectives on different traditions that have kind of helped you unlock some things about your uh the way you engage with your Jodo Shinshu work, or
Mhm.
and vice versa? Do you feel like, oh, I think that there's a part of what I do and my perspective that really aligns with other
Mm.
elements of other traditions and maybe can help in other ways?
Yeah, I think too often in our world we are isolated right from each other, and I think the work I do in the interfaith community is enriching, both personally and spiritually and professionally, on multiple levels, right? That it's only when we engage with others who are different from us, um, is what I found is that it has clarified for me my own teachings, right? But how I articulate those teachings and give voice to those teachings, right? Because when you have to share and explain to others in a way that people can understand, right? Uh, that is a moment of self-reflection, right? For myself, right? That it allows me to kind of think more critically of how do I understand this teaching? How do I communicate this teaching? And where do I see the commonalities and another tradition's experience, right? But also maybe respecting the differences as well, right? And so, but when we do interfaith work, we have to kind of always approach it with a sense of humility, right? And a sense of respect of that each of us is deserving of respect and compassion and dignity, right? And that's all of our traditions teach us, um, ultimately. And so when we approach that, that we can approach differences with a sense of curiosity, a sense of wonder, a sense of you know of respect. But then in our conversations, that deepens and nurtures both parties, right? Um, and um, and that's where we can find those areas of commonality, those points of connection, those points of solidarity, right, between faith traditions, right, between peoples of faith who can band together and can be a force to be reckoned with, right, to transform our world for the better, right. You know, that was one of the gifts that being at IBS, and being part of the GTU, was such an enriching time to be able to be in my seminary classes, right? And a class on Shinran and his writings, and then to have a Catholic priest be a be a student in the class too, and to be able to kind of talk and to dialogue and to kind of get his perspective on you know, on what he is understanding Shinran to be saying, and what are some of these points of commonality between some of our traditions, and what are the differences? But such a rich, you know, learning environment, and with learning from my, uh, you know, my Sotoshu Zen Dharma brothers and sisters, at IBS, the commonalities between Dogen and Shinran in some of their thought, but yet what are the differences in our rich traditions, right? That enables me to be, I think, more effective as a minister, right? To be working in community because many of the people I serve are not Buddhist necessarily, or may not come from this tradition, right? But we still serve community nonetheless. And when new people come through our doors, or we encounter new people who come from a different background, how do we explain? How do we talk about this tradition in a way that is, understandable and relevant and you know and accessible, right? And that to me that goes back to, right, the some of the work I try to do with my Dharma messages and the way that I communicate the Dharma, to bring the Dharma to bear on real life situations, right? That there is great wisdom here for living, right? 2,600 years since the birth of the Buddha, right? The teachings are still relevant. The teachings still matter and offer guidance for us. And I think that's, all these wisdom traditions offer us guidance and wisdom for living. I have a really close group of clergy friends. One's a rabbi, One's a UCC pastor, one is a Unitarian minister, one is a retired MCC minister, and uh, we we meet really regularly, and we talk story, and we learn about each other's traditions, and we and we appreciate each other, right, as people of faith, right, as spiritual beings, as fellow travelers along this path. Um, you know, and that to me is such a valuable, um, gift. So.
Certainly, yeah, and it's such a wonderful level and degree of engagement that you have, and it's something that you said that's really resonating with me in a way that I haven't really considered it before. It's like, well, the Buddhist teachings and the Dharma and all of that, it points directly to recognizing this world and understanding it, and part of understanding it is that there's more out there. There's a richness, there's a diversity of wisdom, there's a diversity of causes and conditions, context, people, cultures, all that. And like to be open up to open yourself up to that is it just can be you can find a lot of solidarity. You can find a
Mhm,
lot of unity. You can find a
mhm,
lot of resonance between
mhm,
these different wisdom traditions. And I thought this was really wonderful how you said it and phrased it. There is this respect that belies a lot of it.
mhm,
There's a respect and degree of recognizing that we can talk about similarities all day, but there's also this respect that there is a difference, and
mhm,
that's great, and that
mhm,
can really unlock things for other people. It can be really important to have that difference, to celebrate
mhm,
that difference as well. And I'm
mhm,
really glad that you have uh, a smaller community of people that you gather with and talk about your traditions with and talk about life with. I think it's really, really a powerful experience to have. And as we come to a close on this conversation, I've really enjoyed it a great deal. I just had two more questions, if that's all right,
mhm,
and they're relatively quick. I'll give you the first one here, and that is if you have anything that you'd like to promote. I don't know if Kona Hongwanji is has an event coming up. I don't know if you have a piece of writing because you've been published in Lion's Roar, Tricycle, Buddhadharma, and you do appear in conventions in different places across the country within Jodo Shinshu temples and otherwise. I don't know
mhm.
if you have something coming up or if there are causes and foundations that you're aware of that you'd want to bring to the fore and kind of share and have some eyes and ears on.
Mm. Yeah, good question. I don't personally have anything that's upcoming right now, but I think that I hope in general people are paying attention to what is happening in our country and in our world, but also moderate that, right? I think to be able to for that self-preservation aspect of being able to manage, right, our doom scrolling, you know, and not to be overwhelmed, but to be aware, to learn, to understand, but also to be engaged. That to me, in whatever way that we can be, in big and small ways, right? Even just our everyday acts of kindness is an act of resistance. And as a way of transforming our communities, ourselves, um, our world ultimately, right? That we're talking about a transformation of society, of our culture, of what is currently happening, right? And how do we bring more light and more compassion and more empathy into our world? Because that is what all the wisdom traditions teach us, is this value of empathy, to know that we are not alone, to know that we are connected to another person and to a community. And so my hope is everyone gets involved in some way in their communities, in their lives, right? And to live these values of their whatever tradition that they hold, right? So.
Yeah, the I particularly enjoyed how you said how you phrased the your everyday acts of kindness can be a form of resistance, and you might not be somebody that wants to volunteer with some sort of civic engagement. You might not feel comfortable being around a bunch of people. You might not feel comfortable sticking your neck out to obviously or whatever it is because you don't feel safe doing that. But
Hmm.
being nice to uh, someone on the road, that you're
Hmm.
driving along with, or someone at the grocery store or whatever it is, that can be helpful. It's like in the face of all of this uncertainty and intensity, acts of kindness can undercut the severity of that even just
Hmm.
momentarily. It can be really important. So thank you for your encouragement with that. And then if there is my second question, my last question is, do you have any advice for somebody who is walking the Buddhist path right now at any stage of it, and what would you offer them advice wise that you would have wanted to have heard when you were kind of coming through it
Hmm.
yourself?
I think uh, come as you are. Um, that Buddhism offers a path of becoming truly human, right? And that is all of us, right? Whatever we are, we can bring our whole selves to the practice. We don't ever have to hide a portion of ourselves from this, right? And what I found was that the Dharma embraces us as a teaching for our whole lives, right? For our whole selves. Um, and I think that we don't have to um, pretend to be something we're not, ultimately, or to be a better practitioner than we really are. That to me, I think is I think the is the one piece of advice, right? That there are no perfect practitioners of the path, and especially
Go
and
ahead.
especially in Jodo Shinshu, like we're very much about imperfection and very much about this limited self, right? But having just the humility to know that whatever tradition, because I know my Zen friends also talk about this, right? When you come to the practice, when you come to Zazen, you come to this, you are bringing your whole self, and whatever is there, right? And um, it's I think yeah, we have to be kind to ourselves. I think that's the thing. Be kind to ourselves and compassionate to ourselves.
and
So
and to come as you are, I mean, to really allow yourself to be where you are at, and
yeah,
that can change day by day. uh
absolutely.
I really appreciate the amount of space you just kind of gave to me, I'll say, just because sometimes I just really want to get it right, and it's just nice to know that if I come as if I come as I am, and I am willing and able to show up for myself as myself, and to respect that about myself, um there can be uh, there can be something to that, and you can really you can offer some kindness to yourself every once in a while. Why not?
Hmm.
Well,
Hmm.
Reverend Blayne, thank you so much
Yeah.
for speaking with me today. It's such a treat to speak with you, and it really is inspiring how much you do for others, and the work that you're doing to speak out and to speak up about things that are of great concern right now, but also too, I mean, just your uh, how are you going about it with compassion, and how are you going about it by just living your everyday life? I mean, you open up a lot of possibilities for care for others, for care for yourself, and to really honor that sense of gratitude that you share. So thank you for being on here today, and thank you for doing what you do.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I enjoyed the conversation.